Hello and welcome to another episode of Behind the Badge podcast brought to you by SBC Sponsorship. We are today recording with video and live at, not live, but at SBC Summit Latin America from Miami. It's really a pleasure to be joined as always by George Harborn, Director of SBC Sponsorship. How are you, George?
I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, enjoying the Miami heat, Miami weather. It's nice.
It's great. And we are joined by Commercial Director Samuel Perez, who is part of a major team, probably one of the biggest teams in Chile. We're talking about Chile, of course. And if I say probably never relegated, first team to win the Copa Libertadores from Chile. You already know I'm talking about Colo Colo, El Cacique. Samuel, thank you for being here. How are you?
Fine, really good. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us.
And it's the biggest.
It's the biggest. Okay, that's
No
Samuel's
questions
word.
asked.
So if you have to insult, you don't have to insult us. We didn't say it. We said one of the biggest, but Samuel's. We have our first quote of the podcast for today.
As you were saying, one of the biggest, I was thinking, Sam's definitely going to tell you it's the biggest.
We all think our club is the biggest. Well, I'm not going to make any assessment on that statement, but yeah, you can quote Sam on that. To get started with the podcast, Sam, can you tell us how do you first started working in sports?
Oof, it's a long way. I was finishing the uni. I studied like business. And it was the same time as Marcelo Bielsa was the head coach of the national team. So I always loved football. I played football. But when Bielsa was in Chile, I started to study football, to have like a keen interest in what's happening in the game, tactics, etc. I read all his books about him, and I wrote him a letter. So I said, okay, I want to learn from you. He called me back.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was crazy. I was like, hey, what do? You prepare a speech and then you go all blank. So I worked for him like for a few weeks. Obviously no payment, so I was learning. And sadly, he resigned to the national team, so I couldn't stay longer. But that was like the first interest. Then I was assistant coach of a fourth division team in Chile. I wanted to be on the pitch. Then I work a little bit in the private industry, like as a business guy, like a year, maybe the worst year in my life, very very boring. And then I was called to be the CEO of a new team in the south of Chile. So I went there for a year. We got promoted to the professional football, and then I had the opportunity to go to London and work for Football Radar. I was there like 3.5 years. I probably analyzed and watched between 2,000 and 3,000 games. Awesome times watching games, big games, but also like a second division in Japan with the fans in the stadiums. And then I went to Madrid to study a master in sports business, sports management. And then I worked for Microsoft for a spin-off, the Global Sports Innovation Center. And then back to Chile, family ties. We had a baby with my wife. And then coming back to Chile, I knew I'm a Colo Colo fan. So I always was checking about them, what they are doing. And I knew that for many months, they didn't have a commercial director. So I wrote them. I pulled some strings. So hey, I would like to be part of the process. And luckily, it was a good process. And I'm already in Colo Colo 4.5 years,
Wow,
something like that.
that is an incredible journey into working in sport. I think what's really interesting about that story is that transition from being kind of on pitch focused, and then with the analysis that you were doing and all the rest of it and the coaching, to then becoming off the pitch focused, with the business side of it. That's gives you that full kind of view of a sports organization. Going back to the introduction that Fernando gave, he spoke a little bit about hot topic for the gambling industry at the moment is what's taking place in Chile around gambling sponsorship ban, whatever you want to call it. I'd like to kind of hear from you a little bit about that. You've got your main partnership with Coolbet. I guess there's probably two sides to talking about this subject from a Colo Colo perspective and a personal perspective for you. What's the impact for Coolbet, and not just Coolbet, but the impact that then has commercially for Colo Colo, but then also what do you perceive, the impact of a sponsorship ban being on sport wider in Chile?
Well, in the commercial side, our deal with Coolbet is the biggest front of shirt deal in the history of Chilean football. So it's massive, and yeah, it's really busy times now in Chile. But I think you have to maybe separate things in two different paths. One is what happened to the federation and their deal with Betson, which was like the league naming rights, and they had to break that deal because they are. Let's do it another way. The clubs in Chile, they are enterprises, and Colo Colo, along with two other clubs, we are listed in the stock exchange market. So we are being supervised by another organism, which is like a private sector, etc., called the CMF. But the federation, they are another entity, another kind of entity. So they are being supervised by the Ministry of Justice. So they said, okay, if you don't break it, the deal, I will take your personality away, and that's what happened. And they did it. So, but that doesn't affect us, the clubs, right now at the moment. But at the same time, there are discussions in the parliament of two different laws. One is the one that I think the industry is pushing, betting companies, the clubs, which is to regulate the market. So they pay taxes, which is like what everyone wants, to be regulated and don't have problems, and maybe being established in Chile, etc., etc. And there is another one which wants to ban any sponsorship in football clubs or in sports, away from front of shirts, LED, etc. That one started a bit sooner than the other one, so it's moving. It's in another step, but we are confident that maybe the other one that's going to regulate the market, it's going to be the one that it's going to be published and approved, and so we don't have problems in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said already, Coolbet being the biggest deal in Chilean football, biggest main partner in Chilean football. To lose that, obviously, you're very unlikely, I'm guessing, to be able to replace that from outside the gambling sector, which then creates commercial challenges, right? Creates budgetary challenges.
Yeah, exactly. Because we already had a law last year that they banned alcohol from being in sports. So that's going to be in effect in July 2026. And we have our front of shirt before Coolbet was a beer company. They are still in our shirt. They are a main partner. But yeah, they already took that away from sports. Now they maybe try to get this other big industry. So sports in Chile, they don't have a lot of financing support. And in the case of Coolbet, for example, or the other betting companies, they not only sponsorship clubs, but they also sponsors individuals as athletes. And without that support, they maybe won't be able to try to be professionals. That's like a big problem. If they ban that, maybe we will lose a lot of athletes.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's not easy.
I think we see that in other countries as well. Like football is, in most countries, the number one sport. So although it's going to be hugely affected by these sorts of conversations and potential bans, because it's still the biggest sport, it ultimately will survive in some way, shape or form. But there's that real threat, as you just said there, of whether it's athletes being supported or kind of the smaller sports further down that pyramid. If that funding goes from those sponsors, it's a genuine question of how do we replace that? How do we keep running? How do we keep operating?
And you have the case of Spain. They banned betting companies, and then they try to get into new industries, cryptocurrencies, and they had a lot of problems with new companies getting into front of shirt deals, and they didn't pay, so they had to cut the deals. In Italy, I think it happened the same to a few
Yeah,
clubs.
it
So, maybe they will try to go to new industries, and that's also very, I don't know, too variable,
there's risk there. Yeah,
too risky. Yeah. The English, the Premier League, I think they did a very smart thing that they came together and they decided to get them out of front of shirt, but they're going to be in the sleeve, LED, carpet, and all the rest of the deal. So, and that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, end of the 25-26 season. Yeah, so there's a kind of like a runway into that taking effect. And like you said there, that was something that it wasn't imposed on the league. It was the teams came together as a collective and have ultimately voted that in as a group because they see, I guess, the pressure, the political pressure. There was a lot of political pressure in the UK over the last period of time, similar to what's taking place in Chile now, for change. And that was a step toward it. But again, similar to what we're talking about in Chile, in the UK, the money that comes in from sponsorship from the gambling industry is so important, not just at Premier League level, but if you look at the EFL with their deal with Sky Bet, it's a huge deal that supports 72 football clubs across those three divisions. But going back to Colo Colo in Chile a second, if you lose, let's say, worst case scenario, you go through that process of losing this sector, commercializing other areas of the club becomes of even greater importance. It's already important, of course. That's your day-to-day job to make sure that the revenue is growing and the club is growing commercially. But speaking to you before we came on the podcast, you were talking about the success that you've had with season ticket holders, record numbers. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about that and how you've achieved that success? Because that's a really interesting story.
Yeah, sure. Well, in Colo Colo, the biggest revenue stream is the commercial, which includes sponsorships. TV is a high revenue, but for us is in the third place already. We have a commercial side, then we have the match day ticketing and season ticket holders and the food and beverage. And then you have the TV. This season has been really, really good for us in terms of ticketing. We have a sold-out stadium for every game. Record season ticket holders, around 15,000. Historically, Colo Colo didn't have more than 4,000, which is very strange for such a big club. We made a really long analysis, and we found out that there wasn't consistency in the season ticket conditions. They were changing every year, like how it works. If I don't know, the different conditions of the season ticket were changing year after year. So the first thing we did when we arrived was to same rules or same conditions throughout the years, so the people know what to expect every time. And then we had a pandemic, and in the pandemic, first in Chile we had the social unrest, and the league was stopped for 2 months before the ending. So we had a lot of games pending. Our season ticket holders base was really low, so it wasn't such a big, massive problem. But we decided to compensate all those season ticket holders, prolong the duration of the season ticket for the next year.
Yeah.
And saying that maybe gave a message, and we duplicated the amount of season ticket holders for the next season, 2020. And then we had pandemic. So all stadium closed, and then we took the decision to prolong to another season, 2021. So these kind of messages, all the other clubs were like, okay, you lost.
Yeah.
You lost your season ticket. We prolong it.
But what pressure did that put on you financially? Because that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because you would forecast that revenue's coming in for the next season, and you've done, I think, absolutely the right thing by your fans to say, we're not going to charge you again. That season ticket for this season will carry over. But that's revenue lost then as well, isn't it? So how did you factor that in?
Very tough decision. At the same time, maybe we were a little bit lucky because the amount of the season ticket holders was not very high.
Okay.
So we could
course.
took maybe that take that decision and that risk, but we had to compensate with the commercial side.
Yeah.
To sign sponsorships, and in pandemic it was crazy.
Yeah.
We cut our deal with Umbro.
Yeah.
They had problems. Our front of shirt also, they didn't know if to extend the contract or not. So we had to find the two biggest partners in a club in July, and we had to change shirts in December. So it was a crazy times. We talked to everyone in the shirt industry. We got at the end a very nice deal with Adidas for 6 years. And the front of shirt, which was this beer company, we talked with over 120 companies in Chile.
Wow.
And abroad. And at the end, it was the first week in December. We didn't have a front of shirt sponsor. We had the shirts coming in the first week of January, and we were like, oof, it's going to be tough. And then
Pressure.
and then sometimes the planets, you say the planets, they align.
Yeah, that's it.
And we had a conversation with Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is the owners of the Pilsen del Sur, and we agreed that deal in 10 days.
Yeah.
So the fastest deal that we have managed with the same amount of the one that was leaving, so we didn't lose money in that side.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
So that was really good.
Yeah, months of work that culminates in a very quick 2-week turnaround.
And from home, because
Yeah.
you were doing like you couldn't go to the office.
Yeah.
So you were working from, I don't know, non-stop.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you've certainly grown internally, but let's talk about going global as a brand with Colo Colo. You have an upcoming game with River Plate that everyone knows. My avatar is probably going to be somewhere. I'm a Boca fan, so I'm not particularly interested in the sports aspect of this particular game, but I do want to know how important is this type of game, this specific game, and other games like this for the construction of the brand internationally.
Fernando's going to be a Colo fan for that game.
From now on.
Yeah.
I'll have to be.
We played against Boca as last year.
Yeah, I don't want to remind you how those games went.
It was a friendly.
It was.
Gentlemen, please, let's.
Yeah, let's keep it professional, please. Keep it pro. So, how important is this game versus River and other games like this for the construction or the build-up for the international brand of Colo Colo?
Well, it's our focus right now for us because in Chile, 42% of the country are Colo Colo fans. So it's massive.
Wow.
We did the comparison with Boca. Boca is 41.5 of the Argentinian population. Real Madrid is 32%. They have a massive fan base around the world, but in Spain is 32. So the impact that Colo has in our country is bigger than any other team that you can imagine in the top 5 leagues. So the next step naturally for us is to try to go abroad. We can't do it with the league. We don't have a league separated from the federation like La Liga or the Premier League. We don't sell also the TV rights every 3-5 years like in most of leagues. So we have a very long, really good deal, but of a long one. So it's not easy to go with them to try to internationalize the team. So what we did is we signed a deal with ESPN, with Star Plus, for 20 friendlies in 4 years. And we started to do that last season. So we played in the preseason. We played with Boca in Argentina. And in December last year, we played with Betis, 2 games in Chile, and also River Plate. Really good games.
Yeah.
You could understand also what La Liga is doing, because La Liga helped to finance to bring Betis to South America, and they go hand in hand to do things. So we had meetings with Betis many weeks before the game to try to do merchandising together to the how you say, the scarves.
Yeah.
With Colo Colo and Betis. So to do things together, and that was really nice because we understood that there is a market for those kind of things. And now with River, we're going to play also in Chile, in the south of Chile. Is part of this deal, and we are organizing already other ones. We are planning maybe to go on a tour, which gonna be maybe one of the first one in Colo Colo in a long time, and we are working together with ESPN, but also with our partners. We have partners that are global partners, same Adidas. They have teams everywhere,
Yeah,
so
of
we are
course.
planning with them to try to do things. If we go abroad, that they can ship the shirts in the Adidas shop in
Yeah.
that country. So we are trying to do things together in that area.
And I guess, with that internationalization, you've kind of started to touch on it a little bit there with Adidas. How much does retail and licensing kind of fit into that mix, and how are you developing those revenue streams at Colo Colo other than, just the international piece?
It's becoming very, very important. When we arrived, we didn't have an e-commerce in Colo Colo, so we built one from scratch, and it's now a very important revenue stream. This year, we opened a store in the stadium. We didn't have a store either, and that's combined. I think it's going to be historic, the revenue this year between both. And in terms of Adidas and selling the shirts, it's a very high number. You think about Chile being a small country, but when we launched the first shirt with Adidas in 2021, we were 8 weeks the top one selling shirt in Latin America.
Oh, wow.
More shirts than Flamengo, Boca River for these 8 weeks. And then we stayed in the top 3 for another weeks. And the same happened with the new shirt in 2022. So it's a very interesting revenue stream for us. We have a very good deal. So the more shirts Adidas sell, the better for us.
Yeah.
So it's been huge. And same with licensing. We are building, we changed the licensing strategy. Before we asked for a very high minimum guarantee for a licensee, and that
restricts it.
Exactly. And if they are not big brands, it's very difficult. So we changed, we lowered that fee, we increased the royalty, but we opened to many other that want to do like a cool products, cool stuff. And now we have over 40 licenses with range of products, like very, very nice ones. And you find all of them in our stores. So that also pushes the sales in our stores. And it's growing really good.
Well, speaking of growth, one aspect of the sport that's been growing and gaining momentum in the last few years has been women's football. I want to talk about your investment, how Colo Colo has invested in women's football and how that helps develop the sport, both in Chile in general, but also for Colo Colo specifically.
Well, women's football for us is key right now. It's one of the pillars since I would say 2019 became like a pillar. Our women's team, they won Copa Libertadores in 2012. They are the only women's team in Chile, males. Also, we are the only team to have won Libertadores in Colo Colo, and I think there are only 5 or 6 teams in Latin America who have won it in the men and women. So back in the days, maybe the difference between teams was not very clear. Now you see a tendency to the same is happening with the men. So you have Brazil, which is a huge market and the huge wages, and teams like they could play easily in the top 5 league or in the Champions League, and they make a lot of difference. The Argentinian teams, they might cope a little bit against them, but the difference are really big. And in the women's team, for the last 4 or 5 years, you see the Brazilian teams always reaching 3 or 4 teams reaching semifinals. So it's kind of the same. So we took the decision in 2019 to make professional contract to all the players. We were the first team to do it, and we did it to all the players. Chile is now in a transition to professionalize women's football, but it hasn't been finalized. And we are trying to give them the same tools that the men's team has. So they are going to the hotel before a game. when they can, they go with an airplane. They don't do like long buses. They have really good training facilities. We decided to provide the stadium for her games. Before that wasn't. Even now you play maybe an important game away, and they use like train pitches or really small stadium. We use our stadium. A few weeks ago, we had the record in attendance. We had 10,000 people, fans attending our game. We are going to play now semifinals in 2 more weeks. We are hoping to reach 20,000, which is gonna be like another record for us. And that's the thing. We now have a very good coach. We brought a Brazilian coach who played in the final of a Copa Libertadores with a Brazilian team. She won the Brasileirao. So we have a top very coaching staff, and that's the way forward. We are aiming to. This year we were maybe unlucky. We lost in quarterfinals of Libertadores, but we are aiming to be protagonists from now to the next years.
Fantastic to hear about what you're doing with the women's game. I think to hear kind of the attendance figures that you have and the success you have in the first to offer the professional contracts. Clearly, Colo Colo pioneering the women's game in Chile. So fantastic, and I look forward to seeing the progress of the women's game in broader in Chile, so you can continue that growth. We are pretty much out of time, but I do want to ask one last question around a really important date in the diary that's coming up. I think in 2025, which is your centenary year. Talk us through about how much of a celebration that's going to be for Colo Colo, and what maybe lies in store that you can share for that year.
It's a huge year for us. 100 years. We're working a lot of stuff right now. Can't tell you much about it.
Yeah,
but many surprises. And what we want to do is to celebrate the whole year, not only in the exact date, which is 19th of April, but throughout the 365 days, with different milestones, with different things, special shirts. You have one there, maybe a tour. So we are exploring a lot of ideas with a committee, and that's the idea, to have like a massive fest and to celebrate the whole year.
That sounds fantastic. I need to make sure I get myself one of those centenary shirts as well.
Yeah.
Then, Sam.
We'll be waiting. We will share our details after the recording. But for now, this has been Behind the Badge podcast, or videocast, should I say, this
absolutely.
time, because we're recording in SBC Summit Latin America. Behind the Badge, of course, brought to you by SBC Sponsorship, with, of course, SBC Sponsorship Director George Hartwan. Thank you very much, Samuel, Commercial Director at Colo Colo, for being here with us here. And, of course, thank you all of our viewers or listeners, if you're listening, and we'll meet in the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.